I'm Francis Rose, the host of the Daily Scoop podcast for FedScoop. I'm here with Steve Orrin, the Chief Technology Officer for Federal for Intel. Steve, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. We're about a year now into the Biden administration. Where have you seen big gains in IT modernization across the federal space?
Well, thank you, Francis. It's a really good question. What we're seeing is a lot of move in two directions. One is looking at, from every agency, looking at the assets they have and figuring out both how would they move more into the cloud, but also it's the data management, the data integration. Once you get the apps, once you get the things and the services into the cloud, the key next enabler around IT modernization is how you connect those to your broad data sets. How do you break down those data silos? And some of the next phase of IT modernization is going to be that data wrangling to be able to get the most out of those data assets. The cloud is a key piece of that puzzle, but there's a lot of heavy lift that I think a lot of organizations are starting to undertake to really understand their data and understand how do they get the most out of it, whether that be through citizen services, intelligence gathering, or be able to deploy those data assets into the mission. I think that's where we're seeing a lot of progress is really know your data, know your assets, and then trying to unleash the power that they present.
What does that heavy lift involve for agencies, Steve?
So I think there are four phases if we look at it around data management with the goal of getting to whether it be results, machine learning, AI, better decision making. It starts with understanding your data sets, whether it be where your source data is coming from, whether that's internal, external, cross agency. And so step one is knowing what you have. And then looking at across that and saying, okay, where do I have gaps in my data? Where do I have gaps in my knowledge around a given asset or a given information? Then the hard work, and this is one of those things where people think about the end results, the AI or the analysis. It takes some heavy lift to get there. And a lot of that's what we call data wrangling, data labeling, normalizations, the schemas, really coming down to understanding how do you classify and characterize the data so that it can drive the engine of analysis and AI learning. And so that second phase is probably one of the most critical phases. It's also where a lot of projects slow down. And one of the ways we've seen organizations and agencies get success is they start doing that heavy lift for a particular data set. And then the key is once you start breaking down silos, you share that learning, you share those data labels, you share those characterizations and schemas across the organization. Successful organizations create a repository for the metadata, for their the characteristics that they've applied to a given data set, so that the next team that's going to go look at the next data set builds off of that. And so you find that there's an 80-20 rule. You can reuse 80% of what you've already done, and then each data set will have some uniqueness. And so that building off of each other really helps organizations fast track through what could be a heavy slog. And then once you have the data wrangled and you're getting it access to the applications, then it starts to answer the hard questions. You look at the mission applications, you look at the citizen services, and you figure out how do I now get my data to drive those decisions, and whether that be an AI outcome, machine learning outcomes, or it's really just a decision sciences kind of approach. Ultimately, it's about connecting data to mission. And then finally, it's the fun part, doing the AI, doing the inferencing, getting the nice pretty graphs that show here's how we're trending or here's what the intelligence we need to have. And that is the end game everyone wants to get to. But there's that heavy lift of those first three phases to get to results, to get to decision making and AI.
We talked a lot at ITModTalks about securing systems, and we also talked about securing data. And it sounds like the focus for an agency should be on securing both, especially with that robust data exchange that you're talking about. Steve, am I on the right track there?
Absolutely. And there's an interesting part of that first phase of data management, and it goes really to the heart of security. You can't secure what you don't know you have. So step one is understanding the assets, understanding the sensitivity or classification of those assets is going to drive those security decisions. When we start looking at, from the executive order from last May around zero trust architecture, one of the tenets of that is being able to make a risk-based determination with a default deny policy for access to data. To understand how to implement that policy, you need to understand the data that's being accessed and continually assess that security of that data or of the accesses that you want to allow for that security on any given moment based on the current risk profile. And so it goes to the heart of understanding your data, understanding how your data gets used, and then implementing those policies is how people will start to achieve a zero trust approach to securing their architecture and leveraging the risk-based approaches that they've used in the past.
So that cybersecurity executive order is one EO that influences, that informs the way that agencies are thinking about all of these things we're talking about. Another one is the EO on customer experience. That's really becomes the deliverable, doesn't it? Meeting the spirit of that and the letter of that, I suppose, when it comes to delivering digital services to citizens, right, Steve?
Absolutely. And it's really about, so once you're securing your data, but there's got to be a goal. Why are we securing it? I mean, obviously we want to secure the data, but it's again goes to that heart of what is the mission? And most of the agencies, when it comes to citizen services, providing, whether it be data, being able to do interactive transactions, healthcare in the case of the VA, they all have a mandate to provide those services. And I think what we've seen in the customer experience EO is really it's time for the whole of government to up its game to make it easier for the citizen to get access to the data they need to transact on the systems and to be able to get to follow those information flows through a more natural approach. And I think that, this ties back to what we were talking about a moment ago around IT modernization. The EO here is really talking about how you take that IT modernization to an end goal. The end goal is modernize the infrastructure and the data such that you can deliver a cohesive user experience that reduces times, reduces number of clicks, reduces the amount of support calls. All those things go towards having a modern infrastructure that can be dynamic, that you can build services into. I mean, the future vision we have is where you can actually have sort of automation and AI built into those services so that people get faster through the process and ultimately get at some point we're going to see user ratings coming for government applications where they have good user experience, and you'll see reviews on the on the website saying this was a great tax application to use from the federal government, as an example.
I have two questions in one, and you can answer whichever one of them you want. You said use the term up their games. How have you seen agencies up their games when it comes to delivering digital services, or how can agencies up their games when it comes to delivering digital services, Steve?
So I think that it's a continuum. I think we've seen many agencies take a proactive step on the IT modernization to be able to provide better services. We can pick on some of the ones that are sort of front and center. We see orchestration behind the scenes with things like FEMA and others where they're coming in to do disaster services, be able to provide those. And they get better as they continue to modernize their infrastructure. So be able to provide faster response times, whether it be in the field at the moment of a disaster, or even being able to provide the funding and financial support post an event. So we're seeing some of those agencies be able to apply those services in real time, or being able to get faster and better services. We're seeing the VA make a lot of investments in how it's delivering healthcare and services and support for our veterans. And I think where we're going to see, going to the other half of your question, it's as companies as organizations continue down the path and begin, on this journey, and it is not a sprint, it's a marathon, it's a journey of modernizing the infrastructure to be able to provide more dynamic and capable digital services for the citizens. What we'll see is you learn from each one that you do. And so as they take more advantage of the data and they apply the data management to a given mission application, what we'll see is what we've seen at a lot of, in the industry and some of the smart cities, is where you build it once, you build a really good thing, and you have to start to see the adjacencies kick off. Mm-hmm. We've got this data set, it's servicing this one mission, but we can also use that data set to get other information around how we can better service the organization, what new apps we should build using that same application as a starting point. And so I think they start to build on themselves, and we see that rolling thunder start to take off as they modernize the infrastructure and modernize their data, if you saw in some respects of how they handle data to drive those citizen services as expressed in the EO. That's sort of getting onto the racetrack. And then as they start going down the run, they're going to see new applications, new ways to deliver services, and new ways to leverage both their data as well as external data to, again, drive that customer satisfaction, get faster time to response, or better intelligence into their own systems. Because one thing we all know is there's so much we can learn for how users interact with applications. The key is to capture the data when it's happening.
A lot of the focus on modernization over the years, Steve, has been on legacy systems, and that pretty much is derived determined by age. Is that the best determinant on seeing where the need or the opportunity is for modernization? Are there other measures that agencies should use too? And what are there categories that you see as being most ripe for modernization in the coming years?
So, Francis, you make a very interesting point. We've, for the longest time, I think some of it is the terminology we use. We say IT modernization. Well, that must mean that everything is legacy and old. And true, there is a lot of legacy and old out there and technical debt that needs to be dealt with. But I think there's more to the heart of modernization. And that's why sometimes it's referred to as IT transformation. Because it's not really about getting rid of mainframes, although there are mainframes. A lot of times it's about how do I use even the most recent cloud assets where organizations have gone to the cloud. They have a past to building new apps. They have an app store. They've done the modernization, but they haven't done the transformation. And oftentimes it's not a technology hurdle. It's organizational and cultural hurdles for how to best leverage that technology, but really about, again, going to the mission. How do I service the citizen? How do I service the military or whoever the key target is in a way that meets the needs of at this moment? And so that's the transformation part of IT transformation, that modernization, the terminology doesn't really take it far enough. Mm-hmm. And so whether it's being, an example of, you built some really good applications, but they get built in a silo. How do you then extend those services to other agencies to pull data together or provide a more cohesive capability? The same is true on the back end with being able to access multiple data sets. You may have the services infrastructure, but the transformation is how do you unleash it to do more and to do faster and better? And I think that's why, as we move from IT modernization and really start thinking about transformation, maybe next year that will be the topic du jour. Mm-hmm. It's not that we've got to get rid of mainframes. It's how do we leverage the assets that we have today, we're building today, in new and novel ways, again, to achieve the mission goals and objectives.
Steve, it's a great conversation. Wonderful to talk to you again. Thanks very much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me today, Francis.